GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. This is our final segment of today's show. We're going to take some respite from these divisional betting previews and talk about players who I think you should shy away from in fantasy drafts. There's always players who, while a lot of people are trying to hype them up, really don't necessarily deserve all that hype. Not an indictment of them, but it's just that in the fantasy landscape, in the draft landscape especially, you can find better value players than these guys. So without further ado, let's jump right into this segment. Let's get another graphic up here. And I'm going to go position by position, QB, running back, wide receiver, tight end. So it makes more sense. We can talk about all the tiers. You guys have been fantastic in terms of your interaction with today's show. So keep the comments coming for this last segment, and I will address them, because I want this to also include you, because this is just my opinion about players you should shy away from. I want yours as well. So without further ado, let's jump right into this segment. At the QB position, this is a guy we talked about yesterday, and you might be mad at me for picking him here, but Jalen Hurts is someone who I think I have to fade. Now, you might be thinking back to yesterday's first live show where I was saying that Jalen Hurts had the potential to be an MVP. But this is fantasy we're talking about. And in fantasy terms, I really like Jalen Hurts in terms of his dual threat ability, but I don't like him in terms of when we break down tiers of QBs, because that's how the QB market is profiling to be. Tiers. You're going to have your Mahomeses, your Allens, your Jacksons. Then you're going to have a little bit of a drop-off where you have your high-end QB1s, your guys potentially like your Herberts, guys like your Strouds maybe, guys of that nature. And then Hurts just fits into this weird purgatory where you want to think of him as one of those guys, one of those Mahomes, Allens prototypes, but you're also thinking, well, is he as good as you think he is if he hasn't necessarily shown a level of consistency? Because remember, that year when he went to the Super Bowl was very consistent. He showed a lot of improvements from where he was in his first year to that second year, and as a result, we saw him be an MVP caliber player, take his team to the Super Bowl, play well there. And then last season, just so many questions. So there can be a lot of questions concerning the coaching, whether it be what Nick Sirianni brought, and that's going to come into play here. But the reason why I'm fading him is also because of that coaching as well, and the new OC, Kellen Moore. And Kellen Moore has worked with a lot of quarterbacks, much like Jalen Hurts throughout his career. He was in Dallas working with Dak, and last year he was in LA working with Herbert. But I think, as Meryl Shepard has left me a tip, thank you for the tip. I greatly appreciate it. The network greatly appreciates your tip as well. I think that as a result of Jalen Hurts' play, it's going to come down to whether or not Kellen Moore can really seep into this concept of this guy who's in a fantasy tier where he's wanted to be recognized as one of the superstars, but also being seen as someone who could fall to the wayside. And that's where he is right now. He's in the category along with players like Dak and Herbert, who Kellen Moore has worked with. As Tap to Learn does make an astute observation here that he has two studs in Brown and Deontay. I believe that you mean Devontae Smith, so I think his floor is high. And that is an outstanding point. But I do believe that this year, especially, with a new OC coming in, and this weird tension surrounding last year, and what went wrong for them last year, I'm going to have to say Jalen Hurts isn't going to go as high as you expect. In my particular fantasy draft, he actually was the second QB taken. I think that he is kind of going to be in that 5th to 6th to 7th QB taken off the board. It's not an indictment of him, because he still is someone who I think it can be taken highly and can perform for you. But in terms of where we rank him, we talk about fantasy football. I don't think that he's just on the periphery of superstardom yet, like a Mahomes, like an Allen, like a Jackson. But let's transition to the running back fade here, and this one is a pretty simple one here. Derrick Henry. It's not just because of his age. It's not just because of his system. It's just because of the whole Ravens offense and it not making sense. I think that this addition was the one in the off season that I think made the least sense. As my man T Money shouts me out, yo, thank you for your support, T Money. Hopefully we can get more comments coming in from you in the future. But I think that in terms of all the running backs I like and how the running back market is becoming more diverse, Derrick Henry just does not stand out to me like he did anymore. He's entering his age 29 season, I believe. He's on a Baltimore Ravens team that in the past has relied more on the committee running back approach. And to top it all off, Lamar Jackson is profiling to pass a bit more. I think that this one just makes a ton of sense. It's not an indictment of him as a player because he will bring a different versatility to the whole profile of the Ravens that I think will be key. But I just think that at this moment you should fade him. Another question here from T Money. Should I trade James Conner, Drake London, Sam Laporta for Barkley, A.J. Brown, and Jake Ferguson? That is a very interesting trade. I'm going to have to sit with this one. So James Conner, out of the Arizona Cardinals. Don't necessarily like that offensive setup. He could see a lot of the touches, though, if the whole Cardinals passing attack doesn't get going. But I do believe that Kyler Murray being there really makes this Cardinals team want to be a passing team. Drake London. Let's talk about him here in this trade. Drake London from the Atlanta Falcons. A guy who, with inconsistent QB play, still has been 1,000-yard receiver. Is a guy who, with Kirk Cousins, I think will really be a breakout star this season. And then Sam Laporta. We are talking about, even though it was the worst tight end one season in recent history, he was the tight end one last year. And then, in return, you're receiving Saquon Barkley, is also on a new team, the Philadelphia Eagles, A.J. Brown, and Jake Ferguson. All NFC East players. I do not think that this trade should go through. Because Saquon Barkley was very close to being one of the guys I fade as well. Because transitioning to the Philadelphia Eagles, I like him as a smash mouth player in that Eagles system. But I just think that he is someone who I don't necessarily want on my fantasy team if I want big production and breakout potential. And then A.J. Brown and Jake Ferguson. A.J. Brown, I like him, but he's not a receiver who I would really swing the fences on. I think that Drake London has more potential at this point. A.J. Brown actually has snuck under the radar in the past, and it's not an indictment of him, but he is just someone who I don't necessarily see being a guy who is going to step in to your fantasy team and give you that much production. I just think that Drake London right now has finally a quarterback who can get him the football. And then I don't think that Jake Ferguson's better than Sam Laporta at this point in time. He's a better red zone threat maybe, but Sam Laporta is setting the standard for young tight ends right now. And you might say, well, Sam Laporta's in a offense where he's not going to get that much targets because of the wealth of talent in the Detroit Lions system. And Jake Ferguson, it might be a nice little option for the Dallas Cowboys outside of CeeDee Lamb. But at this current stage, Sam Laporta is a tight end one, and he should be treated as such in this trade. As T-Money says, I appreciate it. That was a fantastic question. It's a very interesting, very depth trade because it really shows the difference in how you view different markets, right? Connor, London, and Laporta, all upcoming players Saquon, A.J. Brown, Jake Ferguson. You have two guys who have really cemented themselves, and then Jake Ferguson as well. But overall, I think that you should ease off of that trade. It's a fantastic question. I really like that debate because of how interesting that trade was and how I had to really let it sink in. Let's get back to the point of guys you should fade. Derrick Henry, running back. That's simple. Let's get to the wide receivers here. And the wide receiver that I want to fade, saying that Connor, also T-Money again, great with comments here. Connor was a top 5 running back when Kyler was healthy as well. He was. And I think that that's going to be a big part of their offense should, that offense want to diversify more. I don't think it will all be about the pass just because Kyler's back healthy. I think that this could be a very run-oriented offense. Kyler himself is a dual-threat player. Connor, when healthy, when he has Kyler in the backfield with him, is also a fantastic runner, as you alluded to, T-Money. So, another fantastic comment. Let's get to the wide receiver. A lot of tri-state area fans will not be happy with this one, but wide receiver you should fade. Malik Neighbors. It's nothing against him. I think Malik Neighbors is an outstanding athlete, perhaps the best wide receiver in the Giants room. But that is the main problem. He is the best wide receiver in an abysmal offense. And I think that when you have something like that, a situation like that where you are the anomaly in a wide receiver room that really doesn't profile as one where you kind of set up as the guy who's going to get a lot of attention. I don't necessarily think that pressure is good for a young wide receiver, especially in that New York market, especially when Daniel Jones has so much pressure on him as well, especially when Daniel Jones has so much pressure to throw to you that he kind of forgets the whole offense. And so, as a whole, the Giants' offense is one that you should fade. And I'm sad to say that Malik Neighbors is someone that you should fade right now, because in the future I think he could be an outstanding player. At this current moment in time, Malik Neighbors does not profile as someone for your fantasy squad this season that can help you impactfully. And then to close out the show, tight end that you should fade right here. And we were talking about this guy just a little bit, and T-Money might get mad at me for, calling this guy the tight end 1 and saying that you shouldn't do the trade and you should keep him, Sam Laporta. I think that, I'm not fading him as much as saying, oh, you should completely not draft him. I'm just saying that when I say worst tight end 1 season in recent history, that worst definitely means something. And he still is a young tight end. Let's be honest here. And we talk about the tight end market. We've talked about so many times in the show. We talk about who do you value now. The Sam Laportas of the world or the Travis Kelce's of the world. There's still merit in taking Travis Kelce's and Mark Andrews and players of that profile and what have you over Sam Laporta. That being said, I understand why a lot of people are still so high on Sam Laporta. And I don't want to dissuade you that much in terms of not drafting him, because that's not the point here. This is just a guy who I think that you should shy away from. Not you have to. And so I think that this year especially is going to be a telling year for the tight end market as a whole, because if Sam Laporta does perform, that makes it an interesting question as to whether or not we're going to see more young tight ends like Sam Laporta, like Trey McBride come off the board earlier. And so that's where I want to see people shy away a little bit from him this season, so that if he does perform again this season, next season we have a more diversified and open tight end market, if that makes any sense. But thank you guys so much. That will just about do it for this show and this edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Thank you guys for the comments. Fantastic comments. Fantastic comment. Gotta go to my dog, T-Money, right here for that trade. I think that was a fantastic little deep dive into the world of fantasy football. So kudos to you. But like before, like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network as a whole. It's a huge support to all concerned at the network, especially my fellow podcasters and myself. Also, continue with the super chat, super thanks, and super stickers. Make yourselves available to that because they will be very helpful in the future. Thank you guys yet again. This has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. I have been Chris Shepard. Thank you. We'll be back same time tomorrow, 3:30 Eastern Time. Thank you.